Hello, everyone. Welcome to Honey for Silver Linings. Today is Tuesday, March 9th, here in the Great Lakes region of the United States. I'm the chapter director of Startup Grind Grand Rapids. My name is Corey Hart, joined by my colleague here. We have Yorgo Katsanos, managing director of Beneventure Partners. He is in Toledo, Ohio today. Yesterday on our program, he was in Oklahoma City, so he's getting around. And then we're joined today, really excited to be speaking with Toju Duke. So grateful to have you with us today.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure.
Yeah. So as those who follow our series, they have noticed that we are starting to bring on a lot more varied guests onto our program, domain experts, entrepreneurs, et cetera, to help inform how we as chapter directors or ecosystem builders and stakeholders can better do our jobs and our work for the entrepreneurs and our flux. So really thrilled to be speaking with you because of your deep experience across a lot of different sectors and in a lot of different roles, and your influence for entrepreneurs and everything that you do. So could you give us a little, maybe not a little, but can you give us a little background on like who are you? Like where'd you start? Where like what? Yeah, give us a story.
Yeah. I'm not sure, an hour will be enough for my full story, but I'll try my best fit it in within the time that we have. So Toju Duke, based in Dublin. I'm originally Nigerian. I grew up in Nigeria. I spent most of my years in Nigeria, but I was in the UK for a few years, back and forth. And I grew up in a little, I don't want to call it a village, a little town down south in Nigeria to two parents who were professors. So I grew up in a university community, and my parents were, I say they were wannabe inventors. They tried their best to do some inventions. So my dad actually tried to do some baby cereal and, got all excited about it and said how it tasted like Horlicks, and actually got me to taste it. It was mixed with cassava and something else. But he never lifted it off the ground. He was a lecturer, right? So his focus was on lecturing, but he loved the ideas. He was a microbiologist, but he loved the ideas of, just being able to create something. And my mom was the same. My mom tried to make soap and tried to do some inventions with food, and did a lot of experiments with rats. And those ones that they escaped into the house when we were in the UK, and we had a lot of white mice around the house. And she kept on dreaming about starting her own business and being able to create stuff and sell it off. So I kind of grew up in that sort of environment of, a lot of academics and academia, and at the same time, dreamers and parents who had a lot of ideas, but, for whatever reason, they were not able to lift it off the ground. And I think for me, that was probably one of the starting points in terms of, hey, if you're saying something, just do it. And I always used to tell my mom as a little girl, why are you talking about this for so long? I'm tired of hearing your dreams about soap making. Just do it. Either you do it or you don't tell me. And I probably grew up with that at the back of my mind without realizing it. When I got to high school, so, if you grew up in Nigeria or you grew up to any colored family, there are only three professions you can be. You're either a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. There's nothing else. Nothing else exists, right? So we grew up, and growing up, everyone would go like, Told you, what do you want to be when you grow up? And, you want to make your parents happy and your parents' friends happy. So it has to fall within these three different professions. And I chose doctor because it sounded good and I thought I liked it. Whatever reason, I had no reason for choosing to be a doctor. I would tell you that I loved blood or anything like that. I just selected doctor. And I grew up thinking that, I'm actually going to be a doctor. But by the time I got to year 5, I changed my mind drastically. I was like, there's no way I'm going to be a medical doctor in Nigeria. They always tend to have a lot of university strikes. So a lot of students who study medicine, it's supposed to be a 5 to 6 year course. Sometimes they end up spending 10 years trying to finish a degree. And I was like, there's no way I'm going to, subject my life to that. Besides, I heard that, university students who study medicine, they don't have a life, they don't go for parties. And I was like, I want to live my life. I'm not going to do any of that. Now, it was a bit too late, though, to change my mind because I was in year 5, right? And I was a science student. So I had to retake my exams, the A-level exams, and try to do arts. Unfortunately, I didn't make it in arts. I was told I'm not an art student. I don't have an arts brain. So they tried to fit me in social sciences. and I ended up studying sociology and political science. And for the past 17 years, I keep on saying I studied a subject I absolutely hated. It was a waste of my time. Why am I studying about dead people and theories and all of that? Now I understand the relevance and how it intersects with ethical AI and social justice and sociology. So now it's all coming together. But then, I never really enjoyed it. I didn't choose to study sociology. My uncle was a lecturer in a university, and he was a sociology lecturer, and he just put me into his course. And that's how I ended up studying sociology. Now, along the line, my very first job was an admin secretary back in Nigeria as well. After a year of doing it, I was like, this is not for me. I didn't like it. I always like a fast-moving environment, something interesting, and admin was just not for me. And I recognized that. And what I made sure I did was to vocalize it, right? I didn't just sit down and, keep on saying I hate my job and keep on going at it, which a lot of people do. I know a lot of people who are in the same job for like 10 years and they absolutely hate it, but they don't do anything about it. I remembering again that my parents, right, kept on having these dreams and ideas which they never took off. For me, it's like, if you think about something, just do it. And after a year, I just told my boss, look, I can't do this anymore. And I moved into a different department in the organization. It was a not-for-profit organization, and I moved into digital media. Now, I had no skill sets in digital media. I didn't have any background in digital media, but it sounded exciting. I was able to edit videos and come up with scripts for music videos and do a lot of editing and interactions with video, which I loved. I did that for about a couple of years, and then I wanted more. I was like, I need to learn more about this. I don't have the background. We have a lot of tutorials and I've been taught, but I knew there was so much more I could do on the job that I wasn't able to do because I felt I wasn't trained enough. So I decided to go to the UK for my master's. I didn't realize though that when you go for a master's, you're not really taught the job. It's more theory and methodologies and learning how to work with a team and come up with an idea and research and all of that. But that was how I left Nigeria. So I went to do my master's in design, marketing, and communication in the UK. I planned to go back. I just planned to do my master's and go back to Nigeria. But 2 months in, I was like, I'm not going back to that country, and I changed my mind. I'm glad I severed all my ties there, apart from my family, of course, and friends. But like in terms of work and everything else, I'd closed everything off, assuming that I wasn't going to go back. So I didn't have anything that would take me back. And there were different reasons why, but I just saw a more peaceful environment for me, lack of security in Nigeria, and all of those issues, right, social issues that exist, I was experiencing in the UK. So I decided to stay back in the UK. And that after finishing my master's, I came up with the very first roadblock of how do I find a job? I didn't grow up in the society. I'm not really integrated in the society. I only have one degree, which I did over a year. And when I look at, all the people in the talent pool looking for jobs, I don't stand a chance. So I used to do digital media and graphic design back in Nigeria. And I thought I could easily just segue into graphic design. And I started applying for jobs. I was applying for any job, right? Whether I had the experience or not, I was just sending my CV across. And of course, I wasn't getting any calls. Sometimes I was even getting the rejection email to say, I'm sorry, you don't get anything. So I'm someone who likes to evaluate every situation. I just don't work blindly. So after a stage, I was like, okay, what's going on here? Clearly, I don't even qualify for the graphic design jobs, regardless of the masters that I've studied. And then I started getting calls for marketing jobs because the title of my master's said design, marketing, and communication. And I'll get a call and say, can you do this? And I was like, yeah, I guess I can. I'll try it. I mean, I was going to tell them, look, I didn't learn anything about marketing on my master's. I'm like, yeah, bring it on. And that's how I got, a few internships in marketing, and I kind of got into marketing. And I realized that it was a very transferable skills from graphic design into marketing. It was very easy. It wasn't that hard. I started working for not-for-profit organizations, and I moved from one to the other. Did a bit of business on retail with my husband, selling handbags the ladies in the UK. We did that for a couple of years and then we shut it down. And then I moved into tech. And how did I move into tech? It was a geographical change. My husband got a job in Dublin. And he said, look, we have to, I've gotten a job in Dublin. Of course, I wasn't planning to stay back. I was like, okay, we'll go together. Although I didn't take the news lightly, I didn't like the whole idea, because he did apply for the job in Dublin. He applied for it in the UK. But when they offered it to him, they were like, oh, by the way, it's in Dublin. And I was like, what? Who? Why? When? Where is Dublin? Why are we going there? What is this? I really didn't take it lightly. I was literally crying when I was leaving my workplace in Birmingham, because I absolutely loved what I was doing at the time, and it was still in marketing. So I ended up in Dublin. Within 3 days, I got a job in tech. And that was my journey into tech. I've been in tech for 7 years now, working for Google, and it's been very interesting. It's a totally different industry, but I think it's where I fit. And going back to the start of the story where I said I was a science student, I always had that thing for innovation. I always loved and admired, the Thomas Edisons and the Ada Lovelaces and, all the people who have done some form of innovation. There was always this admiration for them. So when I got into tech, I felt at home. Even if I wasn't working in the tech team or the tech organization, I was close enough to innovation to get me excited. And typical me, I work on a product for like a year or two and I get bored. That's the same thing that happened with my first year. First year, my team had to hand over the product to someone else. The next product I worked on, within 2 months, I was bored. And I told my manager I was bored, and I was like, I'm sure this guy's just wondering, what has he done to himself? Why did I hire this crazy woman who is bored 2 months into the job? But, I didn't want to just, again, keep on working on something I wasn't being motivated about. I wasn't enjoying it. And he just said, you can work on a different product, which was more challenging. And again, I loved it because it was challenging. I always like a good challenge. I don't settle down in my comfort zone for too long. It's okay to be comfortable, but it's always good to strive for something better and something more. And I've always had that itch in me. There's always that thing. I'm never settled. I just want to keep on going. Sometimes I ask myself, what's wrong with you? Just settle. I just can't. And there's something that people always tend to say is, by the time you're 70 and you look back at your life, are you going to be happy with the way you lived your life? And the things that you're worrying about today and the things that you remember at 70, what are you going to remember? And that always eats at me. And I'm like, I want to be able to sit back when I'm 70, look back at my life and be happy with the way I lived it. So anytime I keep on forgetting about, getting too settled in the comfort zone, I remember these sayings and I'm like, okay, maybe it's time to move on. It's okay to settle down. It's okay to take a breather and relax, but don't stay there for too long because the world will pass you by and life will pass you by and just keep on sitting in the same space. So yeah, that's me in tech. I'm navigating my way through tech. I'm currently working on AI now, on responsible AI. And how did I get there? Again, typical curious, itchy feet. There was a free training at work at the time, machine learning for non-techies, salespeople. I was like, yeah, what is all this machine learning buzz about? Let me just attend it. It was a 2-hour training and I made out time to attend it. And I found it so fascinating. I asked the most questions, and after that, I went back and I said, I'm going to read more about machine learning and AI. Then I came across AI for social good and I was like, wow, this thing is actually like magic. And maybe it could actually provide a cure for cancer in the next few years. This is amazing. Why is nobody talking about it? Why is no one thinking about it? These are the questions I asked myself. At the same time at work, I was getting a bit itchy again. It's always like a 1 year, 2 year thing for me. After a year or two, I just start getting itchy. I'm like, where am I now? What do I want to do next? Where do I want to move? Do I want to stay on this team and all that? So I got the itchy feet again at this time, and I was like, what can I do next? In terms of career progression, I felt it was a bit limited on my team. I knew I had so much skill sets to bring and talent to bring, but the way it is a big organization, too many people working on the same thing sometimes. And I'm like, where else can I focus my energies on? And I did some reflection, right? I always do like my informal self-reflection exercises. And I was thinking about something that I really enjoy doing. I'd left the digital media world a long time ago, and I was fine with that. It's not something I wanted to go back into. But then I remembered I loved acting as a kid. I absolutely loved acting, and I was always having the lead actress roles, as a little girl. And I do remember I told my mom when I was about to go into university, I was like, "How about I study theater arts?" And in typical African fashion, she was like, "Over my life, buddy, no way, you're never gonna study that." And I was like, "Okay, just just hold your horses, it's fine." Um, and I thought about it again, and I was like, well, I'm too far gone in my career now to go into Hollywood. Where will I start? That's actually a very crazy idea. I love working in corporate. How else can I do something similar, transferable skills? And I was like, oh, maybe I can just do public speaking. It's very similar to acting. You're being on stage and you're speaking and you're giving back to people. And something I've always wanted to do is give back, share my ideas and my thoughts about how I think about things. I do it a lot with my friends. And that's how I got into it. And the next question was, what can I speak on? And AI came up, right? Because I'd studied about AI, and and I was like, who is actually talking about AI right now? I didn't hear about it until I went for this training. This thing has so much potential in life. It's right in our faces, and a lot of people don't know about it. So I started taking up, if you're speaking gigs, to speak on AI. And along the line, I realized I came across the challenges in AI, which I really believe they're life changing. The bias and the issues of privacy and security. And I was like, this is crazy, and I got really interested in this topic. And I was like, I think I found home. And thinking about my sociological background as well, it just segues nicely into this topic. It is in tech, back to being in science. I'm not necessarily creating anything per se when it comes to innovation or technologies, but I'm creating programs and I'm creating ideas. How do we scale the great work that is being done on responsible AI right now to the rest of the world? How do other developers and research scientists and people who are working in tech and on AI understand what it means to build a product responsibly? Thinking about the people in society that this product could potentially affect, even if they're 0.2%, right? What are the repercussions? How far can we make sure that when this AI system is adopted, there is some form of control, there is some form of regulation and policy and all of that. So that's where I am today. And I know I've done a lot of talking.
No, that's great. I'm really glad that you took the time to take us through the arc of the story, and especially where we landed, especially on the topic of like the purpose of something that is built and what it can affect. So when we're talking about building AI and what is built then upon it or underneath it or with it, and in relation to social justice. So this last year, obviously tragic on so many levels. However, we keep on seeing and not just globally, but in our individual communities, trends have been accelerated so much. So we've talked with we've had 3 conversations with Nigerian, just because that's where you're from, chapter directors, and we asked them, so tell us about the trends this last year. And they're saying, well, it is generational. Like generations of change have happened as far as mindset, what's happening between here with entrepreneurs, like what is possible, what can I do, what can I build, what can I be, stuff like that. But then we're finally realizing, or at least talking about, the implications of like, oh, AI can be ethical or unethical. Like, how can that be? Like, how can my cup of coffee be racist or anti-racist? Well, it is either or. Like, that's just it's the fact. And so my behavior, when I'm building, what I'm doing, the words I say all have impact. And so we have to be very careful for every bit of code that we design, right? So before I start asking you some wild questions, I want to let Yorgo at you. Yorgo, do you have any questions based on her experience? And obviously, so Yorgo has a lot of experience in academia as well. So,
well, what is interesting, Toju, and thank you for taking the time to go through this detail, because it shows the influence of both political science and sociology in your thinking. Big data is about big data. And and you have the original data, and then you have metadata. And between the original data and metadata, you have insights, you have decision making, which is a classic sociologist game. How do you see this interaction?
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good question. And remembering when I got into AI, it was just out of curiosity. And then when I started learning about the ethical implications, that's when I saw the connection between sociology and philosophy and tying into it. And even when you read the history of how AI started, you see that there's a lot of reference to the sociological history and philosophical history, and even economics. And I realized that every other discipline somewhat ties into AI, especially the ethical part. So even law, right? When we're talking about ethics in AI, we have a lot of lawyers now who have segued into AI to think about the ethical part and the implications on society. And if we're thinking of policies, what sort of policies do we need to come up with? Do those policies, are they going to impair innovation? Or should we have policies that will still allow people to be innovative, but still have checks and balances to make sure that whatever is being created and designed is not having a horrible impact on society that no one can resolve. And I think that's the intersection, right? Is AI is not just tech that is being used by a small subset of people. AI is tech that is infiltrated and is facing everybody today. If you have a mobile phone and it's not a Nokia 3310 of 20 years ago, then it has AI in it, right? Just have, talking to Alexa or talking to your Google Assistant, that's using AI. Unlocking your phone with your face is using AI. Even going on social media and just scrolling through your news feed, whether it's Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, those personalized news is using AI. So it's more in our faces than we realize. And thinking about the repercussions and implications of it, right? Well, we've had a lot of people who got arrested wrongfully because the AI system could not recognize them because it wasn't trained to recognize people of color. Or even just doing searches, image searches, and you're looking for CEO, and the pictures that come up are not fully representative of female CEOs as opposed to male CEOs. And this is just like a recurring cycle. This is bias creeping up now into technology. The same bias that is inherent in society today that we keep on having so many different initiatives combat. It's going back into technology. And if we're not careful, and that's what scares me, that's my motivation is, we really need to make sure this thing works, because if it doesn't work, it's just going to be like an Australian wildfire that will never go off. By the time, it will just keep on going. A lot of issues with AI today were discovered by research scientists who decided to sit down and investigate that particular AI system. And if we did not have people doing that, then we can't even begin to imagine what the repercussions would be. And I think that's where this intersection comes into place. Like, what relationship does it have? What impact does it have on society, on human society? And thinking about social justice and even people's human rights, right? And making sure that it incorporates everybody in society and it recognizes all cultures, all backgrounds, all abilities, disabilities, just being an all-encompassing system as opposed to a system that just favors a certain subset of people.
It's a very interesting point the one just made, Toju, because if we're talking about social justice, two big headlines in my head are, is the older generation out of the game, and or who owns the data?
And that's one of the problems, right? That's one of the big problems, is who owns the data? How should the data be used? How should it be protected? When it comes to privacy, are we infringing on people's privacies where we're using their data and selling it off to other companies? What are the implications of this? What, in terms of law as well, is it going against people's human rights? And I think, when we came up with constitutions and laws, this problem wasn't there, right? No one could think 20, 30 years down the line that AI will actually make such quick and big moves in society that we have to start thinking about implications on human rights. We'll have conversations around if AI becomes human intelligence and superhuman intelligent and becomes like a human being, right, a full-size live robot, will those robots have rights? Will they have moral values? And these are things we're thinking about now, but it's just conversations because we haven't gotten there yet. So back to your question of who owns the data, we never had laws around data. These conversations are happening now, but as the conversations are happening, people's data are still being sold off to third parties, to countries without people knowing. And the question is, who owns the data? Is that right? I personally don't feel is right, but there's no law in place to say it's wrong. So there's nothing to hold people back. The fear is, and I recently gave a talk, and I gave a very gory story of an elderly couple who traveled to Mallorca, and it's just a story. It hasn't happened yet. At least I haven't heard of it happening yet. But a couple who 80 and 75 who traveled over to Mallorca in Spain for holiday, but because they put it on Facebook, their house got boggled, and all their possessions were gone, and they've lived in that house for 50 years, and it actually tore them apart. And it was because their data was not protected properly. Now that hasn't happened. I'm so glad that I haven't heard of a story like that yet. We did hear in the past when Facebook just started, we did hear people announcing on Facebook and they got boggled, but it wasn't due to their data being sold off as opposed to them just making noise about what they were doing, and people probably already knew where they lived. But these could be like the implications, the long-term implications of these things if we don't put those checks and balances in place.
Thank you, Toju. That's very, very interesting. And of course, the following question to all this is artificial intelligence a kind of panacea?
A kind of what, sorry?
Panacea. Are we being trained to, again, we're talking about biases here. When you write code, you have biases. Every software developer has his or her own way of living his or her signature. When we're starting to deal with artificial intelligence, are we projecting our biases on our expectations in the system?
We are, but it's a natural occurrence. I don't think people are doing it on purpose, right? Because when it's a bias, many times you're not even aware that you have a bias until someone tells you that, hey, you have this unconscious bias, or this is what bias looks like, that you realize, okay, I'm actually biased because of, I grew up in a certain geographical location, in a certain environment, and I grew up to understand things this way. I wasn't exposed to different cultures. So I would say it is definitely, but on the flip side, if we do it right, it can actually reduce these biases. Imagine if we train an AI system without any bias, bias-free. Maybe bias is like what, 0.0002%, very little, because I don't think there can ever be a totally bias-free system at this stage. But if we train a system and the amount of bias it has is really minute, imagine the extent it could go, the impact it could have, because these AI systems many times operate quicker than humans, right? They're very fast, they're very efficient, and that's why we need them. So it will help reduce the amount of biases we have across the world if we do it right, because it will just scale out this output that will be bias-free, right? And people will get to see. So for the example that I gave on, looking for a CEO, and you see more men, white male than female. Imagine if that's flipped over and we see a balanced representation of CEOs in the world across different genders, across different cultures and ethnicities and abilities, and we get to see that. Then imagine the next generation getting to see these pictures of what a CEO looks like. That's reducing the amount of bias that we have today. So it could work out right if we do it right, but we need to do it right now.
Interesting. Yes, you're touching on a very important point here. A few years back, Mary Aiken, a psychologist from the UK, wrote a book called The Cyber Effect. And she was exploring how our interaction with technology is influencing us. And it is influencing us behaviorally in a substantial way. Do you see that often in your work?
Yeah, it's clear. Whatever we interact with on a steady basis influences the way we think, influences the way we work. There's a good example I always give in terms of mobile phones. When I was born, there were no mobile phones existent, right? We had only handsets and landlines. And now I can't imagine myself without a mobile phone. It's something that we always ask ourselves, like friends, like, if someone offers you $100 million to go to an island and be without your phone for 2 months. Can you do it? And people are really thinking, I'm thinking, can I do it? I use my phone as my alarm. I use my phone to check up on my friends. I use it as a reminder. It's literally like my mini assistant. And it's influencing the way I think, because now I'm already thinking technology. And it's so funny, I was having my personal conversation in my head yesterday, and I was like, I've got 2 little girls, and I was like, should I get them to work in tech? But it's something I always tell people: do not force your kids to be what they're not. Observe, where their skill sets lie and their talents lie, and make sure that they work. See how you can guide them into that. But at the same time, we know tech is so important. We know it's something that every human being is dependent on today. And yeah, I was just telling myself, well, I'll just make sure I understand where they are, but then see how they can intersect with tech. So still have some relevance, still be in the relevant industry, but still make sure that those skill sets are not put to waste, assuming that they're not already technically inclined. So just to answer your question, yes, it is influencing how we think today. It's influencing everything that we have. And there's a lot of initiatives on digital mindfulness, even on the phones, the manufacturers, Apple, Google, they're all trying to make sure that the phones are a bit more suited towards your well-being. I have a bedtime reminder that tells my phone it's not going to give me any notifications because I'm supposed to be winding down to sleep. But then you hear the conversations of don't put the headphone next to your head because the Blu-ray light affects your brain and affects your sleep. And I'm like, look, I can't do everything. I can't hear everything. I need my phone to wake me up. So it's going to be by my head. I'm not dying yet. But these are the things that we need to pay more attention to. It's like, what is the impact of technology on our lives and our well-being? And I'm a bit sad to say, there is the negative impact is quite high as well.
I think it's so important to have the multidisciplinary team when we're designing these products. You have to have the person dealing with ergonomics in the room. You have to have the person with the lived experience of different populations to understand how this program or this technology is going to affect that population, right? And on the topic of raising children and the next generation and tech and the intersections of tech, what isn't tech anymore, right? So what isn't tech or related? And I really want to lean in on you keep on using this really great word called curiosity. When you're talking and when we speak with I know most of us chapter directors, when we're attending to our flocks of entrepreneurs, and they have various problems and they come to us, a lot of times we're just connecting with people to help solve those problems. They're looking for a puzzle piece and we're like, oh, we have one over here. Well, here you go. But then we're also saying, well, we just we're asking better questions, right? And it seems like that's something that's been through a lot of what you're talking about is what are the right questions to be asking? So my point here is I want to ask you about your experiences in mentoring. This last year, especially, and with all the mentor groups that you're involved with, Women in AI, et cetera, what are some of the exciting questions that you're being asked or that you're seeing? What are some of the fun trends that are just getting you really excited for what's to come from these technologists that you're in touch with?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I'll start off with, I get excited that people have an idea and they put that foot forward and they go for it. It takes a lot of courage, right, to actually be a startup, to be an entrepreneur and say, you know what, I'm going to give up a lot of things in my life to pursue this idea. So that's always my very first form of excitement, is just seeing someone's idea come to fruition. And again, remember my parents, right? So maybe that's where that is coming from. I'm actually seeing someone, trying to create a prototype and create something. A very common question that I keep on being asked, and probably because I attend some of these sessions, I attend them from the marketing expertise and from the business and advisor expertise. But a very common question I've seen, and it's because a lot of them are tech startups, was how do I articulate my product offering? How do I take it to market? And it's a major problem I've seen as well, where the unique selling point is not clear. I read the website I've been sent, I read the pitch deck, I read the summary, and I come to my own conclusion about what it is. But it should never be that case. It should be so clear, so crystal clear, it's very simple, what it is that your product can do for someone else or your service can do for someone else. Is there a problem that it's going to solve? If it's solving a problem, what is that problem? I shouldn't be trying to think and go through different, click on your home page and click on your about page and services and then come up with my own conclusion. You've lost me there. If I was an investor or if I want to buy the product, like I may not be patient enough to go through that. I'm doing that because I'm a mentor, right? And I'm looking for how to help. But apart from that, I'll be a bounce session if you're looking at analytics. I wouldn't last on that website. And it's something I've noticed because the tech startups, they have a lot of great ideas, innovative ideas. And I think of a problem they're trying to solve. But then they don't think about the journey that it will take, from A to B to arrive at the end destination. And even in terms of a long-term approach, like, 5 to 10 years down the line, it's only very few that have actually thought about the impact of what they're going to do and, a long-term roadmap or plan. Many times they don't have that. In terms of trends, I wouldn't say there's one particular trend I've observed. It's just different ideas popping up. I think I've talked to a few that seem to be a lot on recruitment. And there seems to be a lot on AI, a good number on AI. But none of them have thought about ethical AI. They're just thinking about making sure the product works and doing the research and working with the research scientists. But no one has thought about the implications. And that worries me a little bit because I'm like, these are startups. If this thing works and it's not built ethically, again, that's another problem. That's another software and another company that no one has probably heard about, but is already scaled across to a few different people. And it's rooted again in problems like bias and security and privacy and all of that. And yeah, so that's something that always keeps me in check. So, speaking to your startups and all that, if they're working on AI, it's just think out whatever they're working on really doesn't just have to be AI. Think about the ethical implications, There's something called tech ethics. And it's really important to just think about the impact of what you're doing. It shouldn't just be about the money and how much profit you're going to make and how much investment you can get. But it's more about, what is it going to do to somebody else? Is it going to help someone else or destroy someone else's lives? And being able to test for these different scenarios to know how robust your product is or your product offering is. And if it's really robust and you're able to come up with this test to say this product offering is actually going to be beneficial to people in society and not, further drive discrimination and inequality and issues, then it's even easier to sell. It's easier to get investment because it means you have ticked off all the right boxes, you have done your due diligence, you understand the worth of your product offering or your service, right? And it's easier for you to sell. And it's easier for people to trust what you're offering and to buy into it.
Yeah, I think we're having some fun discussions with our entrepreneurs, especially when they're first beginning, right? And a lot of it, 2 years ago, it was like, well, your first 2 hires are your most important hires, your first 50 hires, your first 100 hires, like that is your culture. It's baked in. Like after like the first 10 hires, like you just can't fix culture after that. So when you're building your product, maybe some of the important questions are like, well, let's look inside within you as the entrepreneur first. Like, are you interested in doing good? Like, why does this even belong? Like, and what is the problem? Like, is the problem with solving all that fun stuff? Now, so I appreciate your insights from those that you're mentoring. Now, I want to get back to a little bit about the data conversation. Yorgo and I are excited about the idea of the possibilities within data. We have Damu Winston over in Dubai. He's our chapter director there, and he's a real nerd and excited about this stuff. I was talking about data with him, and I said, hey, we have people saying, data is the new oil, right? It's not water. We thought it'd be water, but no, it's oil. And he's like, no, it's not oil. It's soil. Like data is soil. Like, let's talk about it that way. And then Yorgo and I are excited about data as currency, right? And then the ultimate democratization and ownership of our own data? Like, what does that look like? Do you have thoughts around that?
I think the only thoughts I'll have again is the implications of the data usage. Like people get excited about big data, metadata, as Yorgo said, and so much access to data. But what are we doing with that data? Is it secure enough that it couldn't be sold off or broken into by hackers? Right? Because it's people's data. Do people know what you're doing with their data? A few months ago, I didn't really care. Like if I go on a website and it says, accepts cookies, I say yes. I still consent because I have no choice anyway. But then I started getting into conversations and I could hear the worries in people's voices. Like, what are they doing with my data? And I think it got me thinking a little bit more, especially when I think about data in terms of my bank accounts details, or, on my house address, or my kids, right? And their interests. And so far, like I said, nothing bad has happened. But when you talk about data, I just think about the implications. I just keep on going into that mode of what will be the impact if this goes wrong? What are people using it for right now? What sort of systems do they have in place to make sure that it's not hacked into and broken into? I've heard of a lot of dodgy companies who take our data and just sell it off to countries, not even companies, countries. What the heck are they doing with our data? Like, it's scary, right? And, policies are still, coming up, but sometimes they're not very granular and people don't quite understand exactly what it is. But I mean, I can say the government and, a lot of organizations are thinking about it. But anyone who wants to work with data, I would say always make sure that you have a privacy document in place that actually list out what you're using that data for, how you're going to protect it, even from your employees. Are you going to destroy the data once you're done with it? Or are you going to keep it? Are you going to protect it from hackers? Do the people who own this data, because I still believe they own it, even if they didn't collect it, it's information about me. So I should have some form of ownership to it. And do the people that own this data, do they have a right to know what you're doing with this data? Who is actually the owner of the data as well? Are you going to give them some ownership rights as human beings, because it's their information you're using to make money many times, right? It's a business. And just thinking it through, the whole thought process of collecting that data, impact, who it's being used for, and the people that are involved in this data, do they need to know? And these conversations need to keep on happening on a regular basis.
Yorgo?
Tomorrow, Toju, we're interviewing Afshin Afshar, and he's a graduate of Stanford, both in medical school, but also in artificial intelligence and machine language. So he has a number of expertise under his hat. And one of the things that he's expecting is that over the next 10 years, most C-suite members, whether they're CEOs, CFOs, CTOs, they will have to have a combination of artificial intelligence, machine language expertise, statistics, some form of finance, and most definitely consulting in the sense that sociological approach, solving problems, decision making. Do you think this is an accurate description of where we're going? In other words, is education going to make our life less dangerous in this regard?
I agree. I agree with the scenario of education and being able to have a very good scope across different disciplines is the way forward. My question is, how are we going to enforce that? I'm not sure a lot of CEOs right now are thinking about it. Sorry, did you want to clarify?
What I was thinking more is that at some point we have to have a different multidisciplinary kind of degrees. It may well be that as a freshman or junior in university or even in high school, you take introductory courses about what is the meaning of artificial intelligence, what is machine language, how is this going to impact your research as a young academic in whatever you do. In the olden days, it was learning how to use a typewriter, then how to use a computer, then how to use a cell phone, and then how to use Python, and then you move from C++ and Fortran to the next generation of web design and so on and so forth. So can we design new courses that bring these new elements in the educational environment?
Yeah, that's a great point. There's a strong need for that. There's a strong need for it to even come into high school, right? Then colleges and interdisciplinary, like you mentioned. So I think sometime in November, I spoke to business students who are studying ethics and talked to them about AI ethics, and they were really interested in it. And a few of them did say that, it's something I would love to go into. Once I graduate, I'll definitely want to go into AI ethics. There are lots of conversations about this. It's funny you ask this question because in almost every talk that I have now on AI and ethics, it comes up. I'm currently working full time. I have my own business, but it's going to segue into AI ethics as well. But it's like, I don't have the time right now to start going to schools to convince them about this problem. But it is a problem that we need to solve. I have a friend who's actually has a plan to go into high schools and start teaching them about AI ethics. But individuals are taking it upon themselves. The question now is, how do we bring this up that it's taken on a policy and a governmental view, right? It's very hard to change a school's curriculum. They're years old, but it's a problem that we need to start addressing now. Students need to be aware of it. And when we talk about AI displacing jobs as well, which is another conversation that has come up a lot of times, if you're not aware about AI and not aware about, what you can do as a human being that is advantageous over what the AI brings, then you could be at a disadvantage. And 10, 20 years from now, you could actually lose your job. You could go to an AI. Like I had a friend who was in the hospital recently, and it's a robot that was bringing her drugs to her. And I'm like, that's a healthcare assistance job that has been taken away now, and how do we prepare ourselves for this? And if we start from schools, then it's a good way to, have the advantage over this very fast moving technology.
Yeah, there's that of a big manufacturing plant, right? All the jobs that have been like they're all done by automatons now, but there's still the need for the one man or woman to push the button like on and off. But then there's the need for the dog to watch the person so that they don't fall asleep, so they can turn the machine on and off. And we would just might be a bunch of overeducated dogs making sure the machine that turns the other machines on, it's kind of scary. But we only have a few minutes left. I have a kind of a broad question here for you. We talk about AI, we talk about data, we talk about our lives and the intersections, and then happy to learn that you have two little girls. I just have a 1.5-year-old daughter myself, and so I look at her and now my brain is like physically changed. Like now I'm into legacy building. I'm like, oh, how do I leave this place better for her? Before her, I was like, whatever. But understanding that like the math of our lives, right? So like I think that I have agency over what kind of coffee is in this cup, but actually 90% of that decision was made for me. Mm-hmm. Are those types of questions like do they pop up in your brain? Like how can we use this to have more agency, not less, right? I'm typing in all these really beautiful captions for my photos of my 1.5-year-old daughter, but all I'm really doing maybe is limiting her choices because all of this, like her avatar is already predetermined, right? So I don't know, help me.
Yeah. It's a question that's come up a few times as well to me. And, I say human beings, we're in the driving seat. We shouldn't let a machine and technology take over our lives. Like if we do it, the onus is on us. It's our fault because we created it. And I think that's why we're trying to have these conversations and all these different disciplines on ethical AI, just to make sure that we're kind of aware of what's going on. As humans, we're very creative, right? There's no limit to really what we can do. It's being aware of it and being aware of the problems that could come up. So, the question you had of, is this thing actually creating my daughter's avatar? And maybe I'm just wasting my time putting these things in. The data that we're feeding these systems is what it's learning on. So we're still in control so far. And we should make sure that we are always in charge. I think that should be the ultimate goal, is having a very good balance between the use of the human and the use of the AI systems that is meant to help a human being do their job better and have more scale and have more impact. We definitely need these AI systems. They've made our lives easier by far, and they could actually, help. There's a lot of AI for social good work that is being done, amazing work that's being done to help human beings and help society and solve some of the world's problems facing the world today. But how do we make sure we have a good balance that, the relevance of the person who is creating the systems and the relevance of everybody else is still there, even when these AI systems have a larger scale.
We have just a few more minutes left, so I want to let Yorgo in with one last question, Yorgo, and then.
First of all, I want to thank Toju for really taking the time to go into detail, because we don't hear this very often, Toju. Sometimes we tend to gloss over many of the important details. The question that I have is very simple. You've broken through barriers, regional, geographic, business-like. Where are you going next?
I don't know. Okay, I'm joking. I said it earlier on. I think I found home when it comes to responsible AI and just seeing a real need there that will have impact on society. And when I'm 70, hopefully I'll be able to look back and taking my cup of tea. Probably on the Maldives, on a hammock on the Maldives, and I'm thinking to myself, did I live my life well? And I'll be happy with it. Right now, I'm working on responsible AI on the team. There's a lot of work I'm trying to focus on making sure it's operationalized, and all the teams in my workplace understand what responsible AI means, understand the tools and processes, understand the challenges, and are able to include that in their product base. And that's my very first responsibility I've placed on myself. And once I see that happen, I'd love to focus on my own business and still on ethical AI, responsible AI, but how do we spread the word out? How do we help startups and organizations build their products responsibly, understand what that means? And I think those are the two things I'm thinking about. I have ideas to write books and all that, but it's still within, the human needs, solving that human problem, making sure the voice is heard, lifting up people's stories as well. I'm a big stickler for gender diversity in the workplace. It's a big thing for me, but it's based on my personal challenges that I experienced as well when I became a mom. Prior to that, I didn't understand what it meant. I didn't know what the fuss was all about. And I think for me, I just have this urge to remind people to be human and to be kind. And maybe it's because we're in the middle of a pandemic and people are forgetting their values. But I think it's just something really important. And yeah, that's where I'm headed. I don't know what the future brings, but I know that I'll always have that itch, and that itch will always keep on pushing me forward.
Thank you. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Yeah, and on the topic of gender equity and whatever, I know that we like to make sure that people understand that there's a big difference between equality and equity. People, they love to have this. Some like to have this argument that equality is enough. But that's it's just another part of the system. So do we have a standard last question here? We're just down to our last minutes here. So you understand what we do at Startup Grind, all our chapter directors, what our charge is. We have directors all the way from Barranquilla to San Francisco, all markets, all regions of the planet. What can our collective group of Startup Grind chapter directors, what can we do for Toju? Like, do you have a challenge for us and how we think and how we want to benefit our ecosystem, or what can we specifically do for you? Like, sign up for a newsletter, or what kind of people do you want to hear from?
I think to the first question of the challenge is just, thinking about the human need and the human problem, and being kind, and even in your products and your services that you're offering. Just thinking about the impacts and just profit driven and money driven, and get into that phase of being little bit greedy, too greedy to care. Just thinking about the impacts. And then to the second question on what you can do for me, and thanks for offering as well. It was a bit hard to think about that one, but I did think about, I'm working on an AI ethics course and a certificate. So still on AI ethics, that we want to make sure it's available for organizations and CEOs so would understand what it means. So when that's ready, I'm happy to send it over to you, and you can broadcast it to your startups so they can actually sign up to the course.
Great.
Well, one thing that comes to mind, because we're beginning now to move into the next level, as I discussed before the beginning of our conversation, because we could have a round table with focusing entirely on the ethics of artificial intelligence, and you'll be driving it.
Something,
Yeah.
something to think about. We'll follow up with you. It is on. We are past our time, so I just want to be. I want to be so thankful. I want to say we're just really gracious. You've been so gracious with your time for us. So really appreciate it. I'll look forward to catching up with you down the road, and all the very best to you. Really, thank you so much for everything today.
Thank you very much, Korea Yorgo. Take care.
All right. Bye bye. Ciao.
Bye bye.